HTML and go wild and crazy with my page setup. Not bad, not bad. Now we know that we can access the contents of the file directly. So, of course, we can set up proper pages. But now let me throw you a mind grenade where we'll have to add way more code here if we want to really serve some meaningful web page. And the example is going to be following. If you navigate to navbar app, so that's the folder, you'll find index.html, you'll find style CSS, logo SVG, as well as browser-app.js. And I simply call this browser app file so you're not confused between the two. So this is going to be for our server and this is for our browser app. And effectively, this is a complete app that we set up, I believe, in my JavaScript course when we were building projects. So effectively, this is a little navbar with a toggle functionality. And let me assure you something right from the get-go. The app works. So if you get any issues along the way, it's because the node is not working. The app itself is going to work, and I can simply showcase that if I go to the navbar app, and I'm going to copy that one, and I'll place it on my desktop. And then if you spin up the index.html, I can guarantee you that this is going to work. There it is. That's my application, and I can make it smaller, and there it is. Now I'm toggling. Again, our goal is following. I want to take this project, index.html, with style CSS logo, as well as the JavaScript file. So the HTML structure, the styling, the logo that you can see over here, as well as the logic. I want to take all of it and serve it on my server. And I know that the app works. So all that is good. So let's see what struggles we're going to have along the way. So here I have the homepage, right? And instead of getting it from the index.html, which by the way, I'm going to delete because again, this was just temporary. Now, of course, I would want to access this one from the navbar app. That's the folder name, right? And then I'm looking for the index.html. And I simply just need to change my path where instead of getting it index.html from the root, which doesn't exist anymore, I'm going to go to navbar-app. And then, of course, I still get the homepage. And as you can see, I'm still serving also the contents from that index.html. The only thing I did is just change the path. That's it. And technically, we should see exactly the same, right? But here's the kicker. If we navigate here and if I refresh, what is happening? I don't have the logo. I don't have the button. I mean, I do have the button, but it doesn't do anything. And I can see only the structure. And we have quite a few 404s here. And actually, to give you a good idea why is this happening, I want to navigate back to our project and let's just console log the URLs. And I think this is going to give you a clear message why this is happening. So let me go back and I'm just going to refresh one more time. And check it out. So we're requesting the homepage. So that makes sense, right? So I come here, I request the homepage, and I serve this HTML file from the navbar app. And then I have three more requests. I have one for styles, one for browser, and one for logo. Now, why is that happening? Well, because in my index.html, if you check it out, of course, I do reference the style CSS because I want to add the styling, right? I do reference the logo because the logo is right here in my folder. And also, of course, I do have the one for the app, right? The one where I have my logic. So this is what happens. We send back the initial HTML contents and the browser starts reading the content. And every time we have basically a path to our server, browser is like, hey, server, give me this resource. So give me style CSS, give me logo SVG, as well as whatever we have here, the browser app, right? So keep in mind that these ones are for icons and actually they are external. So this one goes to Font Awesome. That's a little bit different scenario. Yes, the browser still performs this request, but of course, this is external resource. Now, these ones are on our server. But the problem is following. Are we handling these requests in our create server? And of course, the answer is no. We handle /, we handle about, and then for everything else, we have this 404. So to answer your question, yes, now manually, we'll have to request all the files. So logo SVG, style CSS, as well as the browser app, assign them to some kind of variable, and set up these paths. Again, this is just an example. If you don't want to follow along, if you just want to see how it's going to work, just sit back and relax. But in my case, I'm going to request all these resources here and then set up more else if statements, where if the browser wants to get the CSS, then of course we'll serve CSS. If the browser wants to have a logo, then of course the browser is going to get logo. And again, if you take a look here in the elements, you'll again see exactly why. Because we have our HTML structure, and then there it is. We have style CSS. So notice how browser is going to HTTP localhost 5000 / what? Well, style CSS, right? Well, do we have that path? And again, the answer is no. So let's do this way. I'm going to copy and paste, and I'm just going to come up with different names here. I'm going to say home styles, and then the third one, I guess, is going to be home image. And then the fourth one will be home logic. So that is going to be my app one. Then we'll have to change some files here as well. So I'm looking for styles, CSS, I believe, right? That's the file name. Then I have logo SVG. That's where my logo is sitting. So logo SVG. And then finally, let's just delete this one as well and call this browser -app and JS. So home styles, home image, and logic. And like I said, yes, manually one by one, we'll have to add all these resources. So instead of about page, I'll just call this styles. And the value that I want to check for here is exactly the same like in my browser. So they need to match. So then, of course, the browser will get the contents of the CSS file in this example. So I'm going to go with styles and then CSS. Now, I do want to change right now the content type, because am I sending back the HTML? Of course, the answer is no. We're sending back the CSS. So we go with text CSS. Now, let me say this one more time. Please don't zero in on these MIME types. If you will ever need them, you'll be able to find them within a matter of seconds. Just type along with me and we're going to be in good shape. Now, as far as the right in our body, so in our response that we're sending back, are we going to send back HTML? Of course, the answer is no. Now, of course, I want to send the styles, right? And the variable for that is home styles. So that's where my content is for the styles CSS. And once I save, check it out. Now we are moving along in the right direction because I do have the styles. So it looks already somewhat decent now. The logo is still missing and there's no logic because I don't have the app.js or the logo SVG, but we are moving in the right direction. So copy and paste, and you can probably already guess that we'll just repeat over here. We'll say if the URL is equal to logo SVG, and I'll say image logo as far as the comment, and we're just gonna go with logo SVG. And as far as the MIME type for this sucker, it is image /SVG and plus XML, like so. And let's go with home. And I believe I named this home and image, like so. And then the last one, of course, is going to be our JavaScript. So let's say here logic. And the resource that I would want to provide is browser app.js, like so. And then the content type is equal to text and then JavaScript. And of course, now I would want to send the home and logic. So let's save this one. And now if I go to my browser and if I refresh, check it out. Now, of course, we have everything. We have the logo as well as the proper functionality with browser app. And notice how all our requests are 200 instead of 404, where the previously browser wasn't able to find those resources. And now, of course, we are providing them. And if we want to test out the functionality, there it is. Now I can just go here and notice how I can toggle the menu as well. And now, of course, we'll switch gears and start working with Express, because hopefully it's clear that yes, we can set up our server with just HTTP module. But imagine a scenario where you have a website with tons of resources, and then, of course, you need to set up every single resource in this manner. Now, I don't know about you, but I would go nuts somewhat quickly. All right, and once we have struggled a bit, now let's make our lives easier by getting to know Express.js. Express is a minimal and flexible Node.js web app framework designed to make developing websites, web apps, and APIs much faster and easier. If I have to be honest, it's almost unfair how easy and fast it is to spin up the API with the help of Express. And while it's not officially part of Node, meaning unlike HTTP module, Express is not one of the built-in modules. At this point in time, Express is pretty much a standard when creating web applications with Node.js. Express has awesome documentation, which we will reference from time to time, and you can find the docs at expressjs.com. Again, the site is expressjs.com. And as far as the install, you simply need to run the command of npm install, and the package name is Express. Now, they do suggest this -- save flag, and effectively the reason why they do that is because in the earlier Node versions, if you did not add this flag, then package wasn't saved to the package.json. Meaning when you push this up to the GitHub, the next person who was getting your project, well, he or she did not have the reference for the package. So of course that caused the errors. Now, currently that issue is fixed. So this is just a good precaution, but technically you shouldn't have any issues if you don't run the command. Again, nothing bad is going to happen if you add this -- save, but technically these days you can skip it. So just grab the command like so, and just navigate back to the project. Just keep in mind that, of course, I already installed the Express for the Express tutorial. This is just for your own project. If you want to install the Express, if you set up your own package JSON and all that, if you want to install the Express, just run this command. Now, one thing that I would like to mention though is that I'm using version 4.17. So maybe by the time you're watching this, they already have a version 5. Now, at the moment, version 5 is in alpha, meaning they're still testing everything. But maybe by the time you're watching this, this is already stable. Now, if that is the case, when you run npm install and Express, of course, you'll get the latest version. So your version is not going to be this 4.17. Now, I wouldn't worry if it's, for example, 4.24. But if it's 5, there might be some breaking changes. And at that point, you have two options. If that is the case, if the version is already 5, then you can either reference the API docs for yourself, meaning you can take a look at the methods and all that, what the version 5 provides, or if you want to use all the methods and properties that we use in tutorial, simply install the same version. How you can do that? Well, you just need to go to npm install Express. So this stays the same. And again, you can remove it. You can leave the -- save. Doesn't really matter. And after Express, you go with add and 4. And then again, I'm going to go with the same one. Just keep in mind, as long as you have 4, you're not going to have any issues. And then 1. So this is going to install Express with this specific version. Hopefully everything's clear. And now let's get to know Express. All right, and once we have covered the Express library basics, now, of course, let's spin the sucker up and see how we can make a server way easier and with way less headache. And I'm going to start by removing all the code in my app.js. Just keep in mind that if you ever need a reference, go to the final one. And then, of course, HTTP basics is going to be where we set up the basic HTTP server. And then, for example, the HTTP app example is going to be in the file number 2. And the way we work with Express, we start by setting up some kind of variable. And of course, we'll have to use the require. So we go with require, and then we're looking for Express library. Again, we can do that because we have installed the library. But if you haven't, then of course you'll get the error. Keep that in mind. And then we go with const, and then app is equal to Express, to whatever we imported, and then we invoke it. Now, if you're a bit iffy about this syntax, just keep in mind that it is very similar to our previous example, where we went with HTTP, then created the server, and as a result, we had our server instance, correct? So this is similar. We're getting a function back from Express, and we just invoke it, and we right away have our server instance with a bunch of cool methods. Now, what you'll also see on a web is something like this, where since this is a function, we can invoke it right away and then just call this one app. Again, this is really your preference, but mostly you'll see the first option where we first import the module and only then we invoke it. So once we have this set up, then of course we have an object with a bunch of useful methods. Now, the methods that we'll use the most are following app.get, and I'll just copy and paste here, and I'll just change it around a little bit, post and put, as well as delete. And also there's going to be all, use, and a listen. Now listen, we already covered before in the HTTP module, and this one is pretty much the same, where we just go with app.listen, and then we just say what port we're going to be listening on. So in this case, of course, this is going to be 5000, and then we pass in the callback function. So when we instantiate that server, we will run this function. And a common convention is just setting up a console log where we say that, yeah, the server is listening on port such and such. Now, for the time being, we're hard coding this value. Later, I'll show you how we can make this one dynamic. So for now, I'll just say console log, and then server is listening on port, and then we go 5000. So let's save this one, and I'll run my npm start, and I should see in a console server is running or listening on port 5000. Awesome. So what about the other methods? And the first 4 methods here just represent HTTP verbs. Now, if you remember when we talked about the HTTP request and response messages, well, one of the things that we were looking for in the request message was the HTTP verb. And yes, I set up some more meaningful examples where we'll see all of them in action. For now, just remember 2 things. First, this just represents what the user is trying to do, whether read the data, insert the data, update data, or delete data. And by default, all browsers perform a GET request. So that's why we have here app.get, app.post, put, and delete. Now, all just works with all of them. And we'll see that in a second when we set up the 404 page. So essentially a response if we cannot find the resource on a server. And app.use is responsible for middleware. And since it's such a crucial part of Express, of course, I prepared more examples on that where we cover everything from the scratch. So for now, just remember this is middleware, but don't lose your sleep over it. We'll cover it a little bit later in the course. So we have app.listen. Beautiful. We're listening on port 5000. But since I know that all the browsers are performing a GET request, I simply go with app.get. And then I need to specifically add 2 things. A path. So what resource the user is trying to access. And it would make sense if we would start with root, correct? And then the second thing is the callback function. So this callback function will be invoked every time user is performing a GET request on our root. So basically on our domain. And then this callback function gets the same two arguments. We go with request as well as the response. So this is going to deal with incoming request message, and then this is going to deal with our response. And in Express, we go with res, and then the method name is send. So in here, we can pass a string, we can pass in the HTML, and I'm just going to simply start with home and page. So we save this one. Now, of course, I'm going to navigate to my browser. I'm going to say localhost and then 5000, and there it is. Now we should have homepage. If you don't, again, please troubleshoot, because otherwise it's not going to make sense what we're about to do next. But if you see the homepage, you are in good shape. So we're listening for GET request on our root, and then every time the user navigates to the root, then of course we just send back the homepage. Now, if you want, you can of course console log and user hit the resource or something like that. Doesn't really matter. And then if you go back to the browser and if you refresh, there it is. We have user hit the resource. Awesome. And just like in our previous example, the basics one, let's set up the about page as well as the 404. So I'm going to go back to my app.js, and right above the app.listen, I'm going to go with another app.get. And in this case, I'm looking for about. So that's the resource. And of course, in here again, we have rec and res. And then as far as the response, well, I'll cheat a little bit and I'll just say res.send. And we're going to go with about page. And then, of course, I would want to handle the 404 as well. So if the user comes to my server and tries to access a resource that doesn't exist, well, what am I going to send back? And we can take a look at the default one. So if I'm going to go with about, I should see the about page. But if I go with, for example, a contact page, let's see what the Express is doing. And in this case, I have cannot get the contact. And if I inspect, I can clearly see that in my network tab, I have contact, and this is a 404. So that's going to be the default response. Now, I can alter this, of course, and I can set up my own 404 response. So I'm going to go with app, and this is the case where I'm going to use all methods. Because again, user can do multiple things on a server, and I want to cover them all. Not just getting the resource or inserting the resource or whatever. I want to cover them all. So that's why I'm going to use my all method. Again, this just handles all HTTP verbs, whether get, post, or whatever. And again, this method takes two arguments. First one is going to be the path, and the second one is going to be a callback function. And as far as the path, I can say all of them. So whatever resource you're trying to access, the response is going to be exactly the same. If I cannot find the resource, then I'll just send back this response. So again, I have a callback function, rec and res in here, and then we're going to go with res.send. And just like in our HTTP example, I'm going to go with heading 1, and we'll say resource not found. And let's close the heading 1. But of course, I also would want to add the status. Right? So that would make sense. I don't want to send back 200. That would be very confusing. So before we invoke send method, I can also add status here. And as you can see, I can chain it. So I have res.status. So this is where I'll pass in my status code, and then I go with send. So in our not found example, of course, I would want to pass in the status code of 404. That is going to be more correct. And the same goes here. Technically, we can rely on Express, and it does a decent job of adding those status codes. But a more common approach is explicitly setting up the status code, so that way you have more control of what is sent back to the browser. So in here, I go with res and .send, but before I set up that method, I set up a status one first, and I go with 200. So this just means that the request was successful. So similarly, I'll do that in the about, where I go with status. We pass in the 200, and then we set up a chained send. So now if I go back to my browser and if I refresh, now of course I have resource not found. That is my heading 1, and I can clearly see my 404. And if, for example, I'm looking for about, there it is. I have my about page as well as the homepage. So if we go to localhost and 5000, that's going to be our root. That is going to be our homepage. All right, and we're done with our basic example. Hopefully you can see that it is already way less code than just using the built-in HTTP module. And in the next example, you'll see how Express